The pen tool is kind of in a bit of a category by itself in a sense because can be a selection tool that's incredibly accurate, but it has a pretty steep learning curve when you're doing anything other than straight lines. So let's go back to this building where earlier I used the polygonal lasso tool. Now I'll use the pen tool. So the concept of the pen tool is very similar to the polygonal lasso tool. The first thing we need to do is make sure up here in the options bar that it's set to the second option, which is paths, and that's because we want to just create this thing called a path. Other than that, the concept is the same. We click once every time we want to change direction. But I'm going to deliberately be off a little bit just to show you the difference between this tool and the polygonal lasso tool. I'm going to go all around the outside like this, and now I have this thing called a path. Notice that it's not a flashing line that's a selection yet, because all it is this thing called a path. And a path is a vector object which has its own palette. There it is called work path, and I can certainly turn this into a selection by pressing on this button. Well, two things happen. It makes a selection from my path, but the path remains. So if I were to deselect and then decide later on I wanted that back again, I would simply have to click on this work path and then make it into a selection again. But here's the other area where it has an advantage over a tool like the polygonal lasso tool, is this path is editable. If I go over here and use the tool called the direct selection tool, anywhere I click on the path, you see wherever I change direction, there's one of these little nodes or handles. They're actually called anchor points. And what I can now do is go in and tweak these and play with them. Move it around, get it just the way I want. In fact, not that I need to in this case, but I can even add additional points. So if I decide, for example, that I needed to have another point right in here, I could do that and change it on the fly. And once I'm happy with the way the path looks, once again, I can turn it into a selection. Now, what I've been doing to turn it into a selection is click on the button down here, but let me go back for a second, deselect it, and say I have my path selected and I can't even see the paths palette. If you press Command or Control Return, it automatically makes a selection out of your path. So for situations where you're trying to create a nice straight edge accurate selection, in some cases you may find the pen tool is a little better in the sense that it's more editable. But here's both the real strength of the pen tool and the challenge is when you want to create a selection that has very nice sharp edges of something that's not straight. So the polygonal lasso tool wouldn't help in this case. So just out of interest, let's take the quick selection tool and try to select the car. And as I drag around, it's getting part of the shadow, and looks like it has some possibilities here, but I need to do some, got a little too much there, I'd have to get rid of that part. And you can see it, it's on its way to being decent, but it's still missing some pieces. So that's where the pen tool can help. But here's the difference with the pen tool. I'm going to just go up here for a second so you can see more easily what I'm doing. Remember with that building, I clicked once to tell it to start, then I clicked a second time. Each time I click, it's creating another change of direction with straight lines. Well, that's fine again for straight lines, but we need to select something that's curved. So here's how we're doing it. Again, I'll do it up here so you can see it first. Instead of clicking once, I'm going to click and hold and then drag what's called a direction line to tell Photoshop, start the path going in this way, and it's going to curve up a little bit. Now I come over here, click and drag down the other way, and you can see how I'm controlling the path, getting the curve that I want. Now again, I'm not going to lie to you, this part takes some practice. So for example, let's start up here on the top of the car. I'm going to zoom in a little further, even though I don't really have the resolution to support it, but just so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to start here, for example, click and drag a fairly low kind of handle, come over maybe around here, and start to drag some more, come down to here. And you see each time I'm dragging a slight little handle because I know I need to change direction. Now frankly, I've done things like this, not this particular car, but selections like this, and know that kind of a rough idea of where I need to go. Now I also can see I've kind of messed up here a bit. Actually, it's pretty close. Now this is going to be challenging because it's changing direction completely. So I just stop for a second, then click and drag to make a handle coming down this way, and again click and drag, remembering that in this case I need to option click to tell it I'm finished there. Remembering, as I was starting to say, that because this is the pen tool, I can always stop and start again and come back and change my mind using that method I showed you before with the direct selection tool. So I'm not completely happy with the direction this is headed, but I think I'm going to be able to tweak it. So let me just go around, finish this fairly quickly. This is an example of something, or area where I'll have to fix in a moment. But we'll just keep going around. I'm just trying to show you the rough idea here. And honestly, this is just takes a bit of practice and guesswork to kind of figure out how far can you go before you have to make a new anchor point. So there's my path. It needs some fixing. Well, that's okay, because again, we have this direct selection tool where I can go in, for example, and say that over here, this needs to come in a lot tighter. So as I mentioned, this definitely takes some practice, but realistically, you're talking about trying to get the sharpest possible edge for something. Often this tool will do it for you. It just takes a bit of practice. Remember, we've got two different possibilities here. So you make the path. Now let's pretend it's time for me to leave now. It's time to go home, but I'm not quite finished tweaking this yet. All I would do in the paths palette is just name this path something, which is the same as saying save it in the document. So now when I save this a PSD, it means that that path will be there. Even though I might not see it when I open the document tomorrow, I click on that path, then I can keep tweaking it and adjusting it. Then when I'm happy with it, Command or Control Return to turn it into a selection. And once again, I would put this pen tool further down the list of options, but I think it is important to understand what it's capable of. It just takes a bit of practice. And good news is, if you use other programs like Illustrator, you'll be a whiz at this, because the path tool in Photoshop is exactly the same as the pen tool in Illustrator. Of course, the downside of that is if you don't use Illustrator, well, you won't know how to use this tool in either program. But with a bit of practice, you can get pretty good at it, and it can really give you a nice way to make a really accurate selection.